For this major shift, new development order, democratizations of prosperity, to become reality, we will need to address the challenges collectively and assert leadership with courage. And I like what Mr. Wada said. We need to imagine beyond what we are very used to. American economist Stephen Roach wrote in Project Syndicate a few days ago. He wrote a scathing piece with the title Asia in Denial. He's of the view that China is yet to address the possibility of deflation, while officials in other Asian economies believe that the Trump tariff threats are merely a bluff. The world is actually at a crossroad, and here are 4 major challenges I think Asia is facing. First, we must acknowledge that for the last many years, since the Second World War, Asia has grew rich, or Asian economies grew rich by exporting to the United States. How not to depend on the United States as the importer of the last resort, and in many instances, the importer of the first resort, is actually a common challenge for Asian economies. After the Second World War, starting with Japan, followed by Korea, Taiwan, the 4 dragons, the 4 tigers, and China. All Asian societies grew rich by exporting to the US. But over the past year or so in my current portfolio, I've met many Chinese potential investors, and I told them, I said, if you are thinking, and this is long before Trump, I said, if you are thinking of rebadging or pass through Malaysia in order to export to the United States, the tariff will catch up with you very soon. And indeed, this has happened in the solar sector, and we are now expecting a lot more tariff from the United States. Because fundamentally, there are 2 contradictory forces at work. On the one hand, the United States experienced the shrinking of the middle class for an extended period of time. And because of the shrinking of the middle class, there are challenges both in terms of jobs and also in terms of the ability to consume. But at the same time, Asian economies grew massively and grew productive capability, partly thanks to the rapid acquisition of technology, including artificial intelligence, but also because in general, Asia has become very productive in its capacity. So these contradictory forces at some point will come to a clash. Hence, the first challenge is how not to depend on the United States as almost the sole consumer market for all the exports from Asia and beyond. And in other words, how to get rich without just thinking of exporting to the US. So the second question is, if you want to have more consumer markets, how to create consumer markets? Or more precisely, how to create and drive the middle class, right? How to create a middle class. The world is dependent on United States as the main market, with the European Union and China plus East Asia as 2 other markets. When China joined WTO in 2001, China had about 100 million middle class. But today, by any measurement, China has about 400 million Chinese who live a middle-class life. How do we imagine ASEAN? ASEAN currently has 670 million population. Perhaps in 20 years' time, it will have 800 million population. How do we imagine that ASEAN will become a middle-class society with about 400 million people living a middle-class life, and therefore becoming the size of the market like China as it is? The same logic applies to South America, the same logic applies to Middle East, to Africa. How do we create many more middle-class societies so that we create more market for the productive capacity that we have? And I think this is something that we will have to deal with. Unfortunately, according to The Economist, one of the recent issues, Asia's middle class is not growing at it once did. Between 1991 and 2014, the average annual growth rate in the number of Asian middle-class households was 6%. In the past decade, it has slowed to 2%. Exclude India, where the middle class is still growing, Asia's middle classes have stagnated. For us to imagine a future in which Asian economies do not necessarily have to export most of its produce to the United States, we desperately need to have more consumers in ASEAN, the Middle East, Africa, and in South America. But to reach that, Asian economies will need to create sufficient jobs with adequate and decent pay for a middle class to emerge. I think this is a challenge because we are very used to suppressed wages in Asia. Asia grew rich by suppressing wages, by dependent on a very young population to produce. So whenever we meet foreign investors often think of us as a production site and hope that we'll continue to suppress wages. But we now have to rewire our brains to accept that Asia will only continue to grow if workers have sufficient income to consume as part of the middle class. And as the experience of Europe and the United States have shown, a shrinking middle class means both a shrinking market and worse still, a fertile ground for right-wing populism. Thirdly, we really need more innovation, but at the same time, we also need to ensure that innovations and technology do not kill jobs. Due to the way export economy is organized, more often than not, productions are vertically integrated globally. So we have many companies which are vertically producing for global firms, global MNCs. But innovation is not horizontally linked to solving our daily problem, domestically and in the global south. So this is where we have to start thinking how to diffuse technology and how to diffuse technology to solve common problems in our own domestic situation as well as in the global south. Malaysia is a case in point. Quite a few of Malaysian semiconductor firms are producing automotive chips, yet the FDI-driven semiconductor industry has very little linkage with the automotive industry in Malaysia. As Professor Quan Lee, who I admire and I read his work and encourage many people to read his work. Over tea yesterday in Johor, he said effort by the states and societies are needed. Otherwise, a purely FDI-driven production is unlikely to yield much innovation. Dr. Quan Lee has shown that while Penang embarked on the semiconductor industry in 1972, unlike Taipei and Shenzhen, which pursue a more robust approach of acquiring knowledge and know-how, Penang did not have its TSMC or Huawei equivalents. Over the weekend, in a random chat, someone told me that she's working for a big tech in Kuala Lumpur in surveillance and in dealing with content. And she said part of her job is to train the AI, and she said that her job will be replaced by AI very soon. And that is something that we will have to think about. While we pursue technology, we push for innovation, we will also have to ensure that we protect jobs. In April this year, I visited a very important firm in Shenzhen, and they showed me a production line with 120 boxes, 120 procedures. And they told me that 5 years ago, that particular line required 80 people. Today, the same line required only 14 workers. And I think these are something that we will have to think about. How do we innovate, but at the same time, protect and create jobs which pay adequately, pay decently, so that we still have the middle class to deal with the first and second challenges that I mentioned. The fourth challenge Asia needs care economy and it should be funded by taxes. Care economy is an area where decent jobs could be created, as many of the care jobs are not necessary and not easily replaced by robots. But care economy needs progressive tax to sustain. Apart from suppressing wages to grow export, Asia grew rich in part thanks to a reasonably well-educated young workforce. Another American economist, Nicholas Eberstadt, explained in his piece The Age of Depopulation in Foreign Affairs magazine recently, except for sub-Saharan Africa, the rest of the world is set to see depopulation if it has yet experienced so. Asia is in general growing old and growing older at a rapid pace without necessarily growing richer. So we're aging without getting rich, or we're not yet rich, or many Asian societies have yet to become rich, yet we are growing older. Part of China's economic challenge now is that the consumer demand has shrunk at an unprecedented level due to the lack of confidence in the future, the saving being tied up in the property sector, which saw across the board decline in value, and the worries about caring for themselves as they age due to the lack of social security and the insufficient or costly provision of various care services. So in short, consumers will not spend if they do not feel that economically they are secured, and if they do not have positive feeling or confidence about the future. And this is intertwined. In order for consumers and by extension, voters, people, citizens to feel economically secure and to feel that they are hopeful about the future, you have to come back to the questions of care. Asian economies will have to build and fund a more robust care economy to cater for the need for health care, aged care, and child care, which will not only provide a strong sense of economic security, but also good for female labor participation rate in the economy, as well as helping to encourage fertility and deal with the questions of depopulation. But to fund a robust care economy, taxes will have to be imposed. Over the decades, Asia's economy have been competing to lower taxes for the rich and offering tax holidays for multinationals. To build a stronger future together, we will need a new compact with businesses. Businesses will have to work with government to exchange tax cut for economic security for the wider group of citizens, and therefore a more secure business environment for everyone. So coming back to the theme, democratizing prosperity and how to do it nationally and internationally. I've outlined 4 major challenges facing Asian economies that require us to rise to the occasion to craft a new deal for Asia. As we now grappling with a more hostile global trade environment, Japan, South Korea, and China, the former latecomers, using Dr. Quenley's words, the former latecomers in industrialization and now the leading technology owners and FDI investors themselves, may have to be clear-eyed and not engage in what another South Korean economist, Ha-Joon Chang, called taking away the ladder. I'm sometimes annoyed by negotiations of free trade agreements, because most of these free trade agreements negotiations are very transactional. I'm hoping that, I now see the Deputy Secretary of MITI here, who is our lead negotiator for most FTA discussions. I hope that the former latecomers turned technology owners, namely in Asia, namely Japan, South Korea, and China, would realize that a more equitable trade relationship in Asia, with extensive sharing of knowledge and joint R&D, would build supply chain resilience for the benefit of all of us. Likewise, upper middle income countries like Malaysia would do well if we think more strategically about how to prosper our neighbor. Instead of just thinking of strictly about investment and trade in a transactional manner, we should broaden our conversation to a wide range of economic cooperations. I witnessed a conversation between Prime Minister Anwar and the Foreign Minister of Brazil in August this year in Kuala Lumpur. I felt that both of them shared a strong sense that the global South nations should set an example and to collaborate to develop not just a trade and investment relationship, but also a full-fledged of economic cooperations that include joint R&D and many other things. And I hope this will extend to many other countries. And I would like to see more ASEAN member states having a clear commitment to work with the least developed countries within ASEAN, such as Laos, Cambodia, and Timor-Leste, so that ASEAN is not just a platform for meetings, but one that really brings actual outcome and benefits for real people. It is my hope that Malaysia's 2025 chairmanship of ASEAN could start a new era of economic cooperation with the aim of turning ASEAN into a middle-class society by 2045 with no one left behind. And I just touch a bit about my recent thinking about Bangladesh. As Bangladesh turned the page after deposing its former dictator, Malaysia should seriously consider not to see Bangladesh as a source for the importation of cheap labor, but to invest in Bangladesh to allow for low-end economic activities to happen there. And it will enable Malaysia to move into a more innovation-intensive endeavor with less unskilled foreign labor, but at the same time bring development to Bangladesh in time of need. And this fits into the larger questions of how to grow Asia into the future and to create a new deal for Asia. If we were to succeed in what we have discussed earlier, we will have to confront the ideas of neoliberalism, such as to understand the adverse effect of austerity and the shrinking of the state. We will have to see that the state has a huge role in sustaining aggregate demand, going back to John Maynard Keynes, in times of downturn, and investing in public goods to ensure economic security as well as growth. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was a leading promoter of neoliberalism, and she said, there's no such thing as society. Yet, for Asia to face all the challenges outlined earlier, there are indeed societies at the domestic level, and more importantly, and coming back to the purpose of today's meeting, it is important for us to shape an international agenda to keep nations working together as a community for prosperity, for democracy, and for a new development order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the insightful